47% of households ran out of money to buy food. Testimony in that survey as well about how many adults, parents, mainly women, mothers, went without food so that their children had enough to eat. It's a report that gets to the heart of the economic cost and the human cost of the lockdown. Ayabonga Cawe is our economics contributor. Ayabonga, good afternoon to you. You'll have seen these numbers. It's heartbreaking to go through them, but economics is about numbers. It shows you really how important our economy is and what happens when it doesn't work properly.
It certainly does. Afternoon to you, Stephen, and afternoon to the viewers. It certainly does, I guess, give us a picture of the devastation brought about by the onset of COVID-19. What the survey also does, I guess, is to complicate some of the policy discussions that we've seen. And some of the decisions that have been made. I mean, if you think about, that particular number that you just spoke to of how many people were food insecure and unable to buy food at some point in the month between the months of February and April, and you think about the context, for instance, of the school nutritional program, which was closed during the height of the lockdown, it certainly does complicate the decision of the reopening of schools and does place into some context the other side of maybe the view shared by some of the teacher unions. So I think it's good to also have surveys like this, Stephen, at this moment where we're seeing some really massive challenges when it comes to our statistical agency. But the big part of this is really, for me, is the labour market story. I mean, we're seeing a new class in the underlayer of our labour market here that has been followed, or that I guess is in this state of transient precarity. So you don't know if you're going to go back to your workplace and you're going to be earning whatever you earned before COVID-19. You're not sure if you still have your job. And I guess the difficulty for many is that they find themselves in households where nobody earns a child support grant and nobody earns an old age pension as well. And about 30% of those, according to some of the data that's come out here, who were retrenched between February and April, have no household level grant protection, which I guess makes calls for the basic income grant a lot more urgent.
I imagine it does. So it's important to remember that this data comes from during the lockdown period. So from the beginning of June, the economy is supposed to be running again. There'll be no data, or certainly no sort of live data that I'm aware of, that will be able to tell us how many of those people have an income now. The point is, either way, by the end of the year, those households will have lost a lot of money and probably not be able to get themselves back to where they were, say, 3 months ago.
Indeed, indeed. And I guess even, as people would often say, I guess necessity is sometimes the mother of innovation, because what we've seen here is a survey that is an outcome of a short 20-minute telephone conversation, just like you and I are having, which is showing us, I guess, the depth of the devastation that we've seen here in the labour market. It's very gendered, and we've seen that the bulk of the burden of adjustment to a new COVID-19 reality is resting on the shoulders of women, it's resting on the shoulders of black people, it's resting on the shoulders of those who have limited or no skill. And we're also seeing that the decimation is also happening in the more low-wage, low-productivity segments of our labour market. And it's only set to make our unemployment number and picture a lot worse if this trend continues. The economy might be open now, Stephen, but we certainly haven't recovered from all of the sort of down tools that we saw during the lockdown. And if you think about the recent decision, for instance, about the ban on alcohol and the implications that that is going to have on subsectors of the economy that feed into the production of alcohol in the manufacturing sense, then that's also going to have a devastating impact not only in the immediate, not only in 2020, but certainly for the next coming years as well.
Okay, so the conversations around that, what do we do now? I mean, we just simply should not, and certainly we just cannot accept people going hungry in South Africa. So what do? We know that food parcels work to an extent, but I would imagine the most efficient mechanism is actually to push money into these households so that they can use the established food chains that they already are, the supply chains that they already are, through the supermarkets, spas, shops, whatever it is, to actually get food. So then, how do we do that? And we know about the problems that we've had with the Social Security Agency.
Yes, yes. Look, I think there's two things, Stephen, that potentially could be done by our country, and I'll come back to whether or not these are feasible and possible in the macro-fiscal context. But the first one is that we have to expand the social safety nets that are available to people. And so I welcome, this decision to shift towards a basic income grant, and some of the moments that have been made around that, and we'll certainly await the detail. But I think that's the first line. The second line is to really consider that for many people in our economy now, unemployment is going to be a structural and a permanent phenomenon. The inability to have a wage, some form of wage employment, is going to be the reality for many people. And we need to open up the conversation now about some kind of job guarantee that is able to scale and effectively link up the public employment programs that we have with all of the massive infrastructure projects and the infrastructure drives that we're going to be undertaking. So every project that we're thinking about has to have some component of labor intensity to it that can feed into that kind of job guarantee. And then maybe the third part, Stephen, is really opening up the space in the care economy for us to have some large-scale employment there on the back of all of the difficulties that are coming with COVID-19 as one part of a bigger planetary crisis that we faced with. I think those are the immediate tasks. Whether or not we're going to be able to do that, I don't think you can do that in the next 24 months if you're planning to cut $250 billion in your public expenditure when you know that it's often government expenditure and government investment that crowds in private investment and creates the basis for some of that to happen. So I think the reality, Stephen, is that at the end of the day, you're going to have to make very difficult choices and try and opt out of this phenomenon of trying to move into different directions all at the same time.
I mean, a lot going on in our economy. Well, unfortunately, a lot not going on in our economy. One of the problems, I mean, we talk about all of this, but we also know in an economy like ours, you need electricity. Stage 2 load shedding started just, 51 minutes ago, an hour and 51 minutes ago. And I've been struggling to see any progress that's been made this year on Eskom, and I'm afraid I can't see it.
It's a tragedy, Stephen. It's a tragedy that we are in the middle of winter, nearing the peak of infections, and we've got power cuts. In a situation where we are undertaking a energy reform process, you saw the integrated resource plan, we built 2 power stations over the last 15 years or so, and we find ourselves at a point now where we're having power cuts. This is a manifestation of something much deeper. The underlying issue in many cases also has to do with the operating model and the balance sheet of Eskom, and the impact that certain customers, primarily many of our municipalities, have on the short-term cash flow position of Eskom. And in addition to that, we can add all of the other impropriety, corruption, and everything else that has been happening. And if we think about the crisis at a municipal level, add to that corruption, add to that this monolithic idea of this big utility, which is really something we're going to have to move away from. We all have the challenges of, being reliant on this one dominant supplier. And so this is an opportunity, Stephen. It's an opportunity to undertake a proper reform and transition and a proper just transition that is able to unlock green jobs and not to be something that is going to entrench capital intensity in our economy and the importation of skills, capital, and everything else. So I think there is an opportunity for us to use the reform of our electricity and energy sector to crowd in investment. But all of that is going to be a pipe dream so long as we have the day-to-day and very immediate operational challenges that Eskom is facing. If you look at the weekly demand schedule, I mean, Eskom has no capability at this point in time to carry on its shoulders an economy anywhere near growing at 1.5%, 2%, let alone the 5% in the NDP. So you've got a real and a very visceral constraint when it comes to energy provision in the South African economy. And I think all of the things we're talking about, all of these recovery plans, even that we're talking about, are going to come to naught if we don't respond to that immediate challenge. And we've realized that throwing more money at it sometimes isn't really the solution.